Welcome to The 5 Books, where each week we talk with a Jewish author about 5 books that are near and dear to them. My name is Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen, and today I'll be talking with Dahlia Adler about her new book, Soon by You, a romance novel set in the Modern Orthodox community on the Upper West Side.
I just thought it's such a great setting. It's so romance novel-like, and people look at romances with religious main characters and kind of have certain expectations of what they're going to be and what they're going to look like. And even other Jews, they see Orthodox and they're like, this is going to be really boring. Or, just kind of assume it's going to be closed door, low spice. And I'm like, no, there's a lot of nuance here, and I really wanted to dig into it.
Dahlia Adler is an award-winning author of romance novels for both teens and adults, a prolific YA anthologist, and the founder of the website LGBTQ Reads. Her novels include the Kids Indie Next Picks, Cool for the Summer, Home Field's Advantage, and Going by Coastal, a Sidney Taylor honor book. She lives in the New York City suburbs with her family. In this episode, we'll talk with Dahlia about how writing fiction was a way to experience life beyond her Orthodox upbringing.
I was a kid of the late 80s and 90s, so it's when those series were very big. Sweet Valley and Babysitter's Club, and I just wanted to live in that world so badly, but not in a way where I was unhappy being Modern Orthodox. I was just like, oh, that's a life. I'm never going to have anything that looks like that. Like, I'm not going to run around in a bikini. I'm not going to a diner with my friends. I'm not doing this thing on Saturdays. And so I realized that writing was sort of a way to live another life. And as soon as that idea came into my head, it never left.
And we'll discuss how Dahlia discovered her bisexual identity through writing her second novel.
So at the time, I was just sort of like getting very frustrated. I felt like none of the characters were working, and I was talking to one of my critique partners. I was like, I wish I could just make her a lesbian. And something clicked in my head. And then I sent the book to a friend who said, like, this does not read like it was written by a straight girl. And I'm like, I am not sure that it was.
All that and more coming up next. Welcome to the 5 Books, Dahlia. I'm so happy to talk to you today. Soon by You is a book I just didn't know that I was waiting for. I found it delightful and so deeply felt. It's set in the single scene on the Upper West Side of the Modern Orthodox world, which I'm familiar with all of its particular rhythms and expectations. And there's also a serious side of spice. I was truly hooked by these two characters. So can you start by giving us a brief synopsis of the book? And then as a prolific writer of romance, I'd love for you to tell us what you think that romance as a genre can do that other genres can't do.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the kind words and for having me. Soon by You is, as you said, a modern Orthodox romance set on the Upper West Side in the single scene. So Ariel, the main female character, is kind of a free spirit in the sense of she doesn't like to be tied down, but mostly she doesn't feel like a grown-up. She's on the verge of turning 30. So many of her friends have already gotten married, and then her best friend gets engaged, and she just feels completely lost. And then you have Judah Klein, who is a wedding singer, like a really in-demand popular wedding singer who goes viral one night and his star is really on the rise. And he has been dating for more than 10 years. But she keeps being a bridesmaid at weddings at which he's a wedding singer. And they just clash in every good and bad way. And they decide to have fun seeing where it goes. But when they make this little deal to kind of enjoy a week together and then it's over, neither one is really ready for it to be done. But with so little relationship expertise between them, they really don't know how to handle that. And so, typical romance hijinks and confusion ensue. And so it's about them finding their way back to each other in a meaningful way.
So tell us what you think that romance does as a genre, and in particular as it relates to identity.
I mean, I think romance is phenomenal for anything you could need. And these times that are incredibly difficult, it can bring so much joy, but it's also a great vehicle for tackling serious issues. I've read fantastic romance novels about infertility, about identity, gender identity, and sexual orientation. I deal with, obviously religious identity and how that can differ from person to person. And it's also just different ways of communicating. So for Ari and Judah, who have trouble kind of speaking their feelings, they get closer physically before they learn to get closer emotionally, or they're kind of doing both simultaneously without really realizing that they're doing that. And so, people kind of look at physical or spicy romances and think of them as like, oh, that's smut. And, they look at it as like very lowbrow. But for some people, it is the way that they get close to other people. It is the way connections develop. It is the way, it's a different kinds of conversation. It's just a conversation that is not verbal. And so for people who have trouble finding the words for what they want to say, I think that romance can be a tremendous vehicle for understanding the thoughts that are going on in your heart, in your mind, and that they don't necessarily present themselves in the most traditional way. But I really think that they can be amazing for helping people see and understand themselves and learning how to relate to other people and just finding a place in the world.
You've had this incredibly successful career writing YA and new adult, which was a new category that I didn't know existed. But what made you want to set this book in the modern Orthodox world?
I haven't seen it. I've seen very little. There are a couple of authors who've done it, but this very specific Upper West Side New York scene, that was almost all of my friends' experience. So for none of us to have a romance, and we're big romance novel readers, and none of us had something that looked like our early, mid, late 20s. And so I really, really wanted to do something that we could all see ourselves in. And I've gotten responses like, this is the book I've been dying to read or dying to write, or this felt exactly like my experience. And that's kind of the best thing you can hear, because it is definitely a first in some ways. There's also ways in which it's not. We're here to talk about, the shoulders I stand on. But I just thought it's such a great setting. It's so romance novel-like. And people look at romances with religious main characters and kind of have certain expectations of what they're going to be and what they're going to look like. And even other Jews, they see Orthodox and they're like, this is going to be really boring. Or just kind of assume it's going to be closed door, low spice. And I'm like, no, there's a lot of nuance here. And I really wanted to dig into it. And so it was really, really fun to be able to do that. And it seems to have resonated with a lot of people who had similar entries into adulthood.
Book 1, A Jewish Book from Childhood, Alan and Naomi by Myron Lavoie.
So I have always been modern Orthodox. I come from a modern Orthodox home. I live 2 blocks from where I grew up, so there haven't been, a huge number of changes from my upbringing to now. But it was a very, emphasis on modern. I was reading anything, watching anything. I, felt free. I know people kind of here growing up Orthodox, they picture something very restrictive. And yes, I kept Shabbos and kosher. But honestly, keeping Shabbos is fantastic for becoming a reader. I was a huge reader as a result. And so that's what I'm coming from. I went to, Jewish day school, Jewish high school, a year in seminary. I was active in the Hillel at NYU. Just, my whole life has been very heavily modern Orthodox. More, I would say, observant than spiritual. My maternal grandfather was actually a big rabbi, so I feel like that was kind of always, he passed before I was born, but that always kind of hung over as we are definitely carrying on Jewish legacy. And my paternal grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and my home was very Jewish. In all the stereotypically Ashkenaz American ways,
Well, I'm curious, what were the kind of stories that you heard as a kid about family? Like you mentioned that your one set of grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Did that loom large for you in your childhood?
It didn't loom hugely large because that grandfather also passed before I was born. That grandmother did not particularly like to talk about it. It sort of filters in for life. Somebody a bunch of years ago was putting Jewish authors on a list. And the visceral reaction I had to that happening, I was in public having almost a panic attack to it. And you never know the ways that's really going to filter into your system.
And did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
That came from really early. Yeah. So I started writing, I want to say I was about 8 years old when I started really taking it seriously. I just loved the books I was reading. I'm the youngest by a lot. So I was an early reader, but I was also reading age-inappropriate books from really early on. I just picked up my sister's Sweet Valley High book when I was 5. And I'm asking inane questions about it because I don't understand idioms at that point. The more I read these books, and at the time, I was a kid of the late 80s and 90s. So it's when those series were very big, Sweet Valley and Babysitter's Club. And I just wanted to live in that world so badly, but not in a way where I was unhappy being modern Orthodox. I was just like, oh, that's a life. I'm never going to have anything that looks like that. Like, I'm not going to run around in a bikini. I'm not going to a diner with my friends. I'm not doing this thing on Saturdays. And so I realized that writing was sort of a way to live another life. And as soon as that idea came into my head, it never left. So I started writing really terrible ripoffs of those kind of series. And then by high school, I was writing, thankfully, like more original fiction. Nothing that will ever see the light of day, but, you know, real like full books of YA. I always wanted to be a YA author. I mean, that was really it.
So tell me about when you read Alan and Naomi.
So I think that was about 5th grade. It was assigned reading from school, which I have to say, I was really lucky in having some fantastic assigned reading. So shout out to the staff of SAR Academy and Ramaz that picked those books that I loved.
Can you give us like a 2-sentence synopsis of what the book is for people who don't know it?
My memory of it is that it's about a young boy who was probably about my age then. I was, let's say 10 or 11 when I read it, who befriends a girl. I think they're in America now, and she has escaped from France, and she is very, very traumatized, and he becomes the friend that she can open up with, and they work this whole book forming this friendship as she comes back to herself, and then there's an incident that sort of undoes it all, and it is devastating. And it's a Holocaust book. And at the time, we did not have the kind of Jewish literature that we have now. We did not have tremendous amounts of Jewish middle grade and YA. So if you were reading Jewish books, there was a really good chance you were reading Holocaust books. And so, between associating them with assignments and knowing you're in for devastation when you read them and kind of feeling like this is everything, this is what we get in Jewish lit and there's no joy in it, it's really easy to have no feelings about any of those books you're reading, which sounds so heartless, but I think is kind of how I felt at the time. But this was sort of an exploration of PTSD in a child who had been in, I think it was France during the Holocaust. And so it wasn't a book about the camps, and it wasn't a book about grown-ups, and it wasn't from a grown-up perspective, and it wasn't a grandfather telling his child. It was a child encountering another child who had been traumatized. And there was something about that just hit me. And I was like, oh, it just needed the right perspective for me to make this story hit and make me have a better understanding of what it might have been like growing up in that, being influenced by that. Because like I said, it wasn't a huge topic of conversation in my house. It was something we knew. We definitely knew. And later we found out my grandparents had both written memoirs, and I've read them. So they didn't never talk about them. We have those, but it wasn't a verbal conversation that we had more than once in my entire life. But this felt like, okay, you found a perspective that is gutting me, that is making me feel this, that is sort of making me understand the fundamental change to the brain of having an experience like that. And so I don't think that was something I had gotten from another book at that point, and I don't think that was something I had gotten from Holocaust literature at that point. So that book just, oh my gosh, I remember crying on my bedroom floor, and it just was incredible to me that a book could do that. And I was kind of grateful as somebody who wanted to more viscerally feel that a book had done that to me.
The book it deals with trauma and care within this Jewish context. Did that shape how you think about emotional responsibility in relationships as you're writing?
I think what it highlighted for me most was how much a person can do for you by not giving up on you. He had no reason to think, if I just keep pushing, this will turn into a life-changing friendship. It probably felt like trying to befriend a brick wall at that point. But the idea of just sticking with somebody who's been through trauma, who can't say I need you, but needs you, I think that the idea of that being one of just the greatest kindnesses, I think is what I really took from it. And I, can definitely see that as a Jewish value.
Yeah. The book, as you mentioned, it was published in 1977 when Holocaust literature was very new, and especially for young adults, and it won numerous awards. What's your experience been in the publishing world as it relates to telling Jewish stories?
That has changed so much. I mean, when I came in, I think So I debuted in 2014. The idea of writing a Jewish story, it wasn't what I wanted to do. To be fair, this isn't something I tried and failed. Like I said, my impetus for writing was living a different life. I mean, my first thing was a Hollywood romance. It didn't occur to me as something anybody would want. And the association was still Holocaust lit. I do think I have been so privileged to watch that change. And now in, YA and adult and middle grade, there's coming of age and there's Jewish romance and there's fantasy. There's a tiny bit of horror. There's Jewish sci-fi. I mean, it's really amazing. Is there a ton? No. But is there the broader category of pretty much anything you could be looking for? I want to say probably, which I think is an amazing thing. But that is so incredibly new. And I got to judge the National Jewish Book Awards a year or two ago. There were still a bunch of Holocaust titles on the list, and all the judges were kind of like, we do not feel inclined to continue putting this forth as representative of what the Jewish literature experience is. There was a book we loved so much that we ended up awarding it anyway, and that's the magic of, sort of finding a different inroad that still really hits viscerally for readers, even after so many years of that. But I think from authors, from readers, there is a sort of fatigue. And also it's not something, Holocaust literature is not something you're going to do better in 2026 than someone did it in 1977. We're only further. So I do think it's important to still read it. I do think it's important to still assign it. I do think it's really important to keep those titles in circulation and keep recommending them. But it's not something for, unless you're a survivor writing your memories because you're sort of reaching end of life, it's not something people are going to keep writing. And so I love the way we have pivoted to having such a greater variety of modern Jewish literature. I don't want to forget what we had. And I think it's reading the book that we awarded. I think it was called Becoming Janet. That also struck a chord in me because I was like, right, I kind of thought I was sort of done reading Holocaust literature. And now I'm like, no, this is why we don't finish. We don't want to forget this. We don't want anybody to forget this. And there's still marvelous reads out there that I have not read. But I do love that going forward, we are writing more Jewish joy, Jewish genre, more things through Jewish lenses. And so I do love that we are growing in that way.
When you wanted to publish this book set in the modern Orthodox world, did you experience any pushback from within publishing?
I didn't experience any from anybody who explicitly said it was that. I do think it might have been different if I were a debut. Let's say there was somebody, it always stuck with me, somebody's like, I really don't understand the pacing of this because it's not laid out in typical romance novel beats, which are, there's a real, this physical encounter happens at this point, and the I love you happens at this point, and you can find a lot of books that are really laid out on a grid like that, and it's not that. But I have definitely seen, not that I read my reviews, but if I did, it's possible I would see some that were too much. Which, in fairness, there's a lot of Yiddish and a lot of Hebrew, and I thought I did a decent job putting everything in context. Everybody's not going to feel that way, but my agent's not Jewish and my editor's not Jewish. So I feel like if they get it, I feel pretty good about it. But it had multiple offers and it was a good book deal. And so, I definitely cannot cry pushback or anything. My editor is so supportive of all the Jewish content, really.
I loved that at the end you broke down all the different parts of a Jewish wedding, engagement, etc., and explained them to the reader.
So I actually did that at my own wedding. That's where the idea came from for just my husband's coworkers. There were, I think, 7 Gentiles at my entire wedding. One was my boss from the summer before, who I loved. She was one of those people who knew everything, so she didn't need an explainer. But my husband's coworkers, he was new to a law firm. He had 7 non-Jewish coworkers, and I was like, you know what, this is going to be super weird for them. Let me write this all up for them. But that's what gave me the idea for the Jewish wedding explainer. So that was fun.
Book 2, A Jewish Book from Adulthood, Playing with Matches by Suri Rosen.
what was so incredibly fun for me, I think this was published in 2014, and I think it was a Canadian publisher, ECW Press, if I recall correctly. I feel like this would not have gotten published in America, but it is so modern Orthodox, and for anybody who, like me, spent the 2000s on onlysimchas.com, this book was like about being on onlysimchas.com.
For those who don't know, just tell us what Only Simchas is.
So onlysimchas.com, it might still be around, but it was pre-Facebook, and I think Facebook kind of killed it. But onlysimchas.com was this website where you announced engagements and weddings and put up pictures. And I love taking pictures. And so for every time one of my friends got engaged, I would be the one at the engagement party taking pictures and then putting up a gallery. Oh my God. And I would go every night because you find people you know from camp. I mean, Jewish geography, you're like going to know somebody on it literally every day. I spent so much time on that website, and it was so much fun. And then I read this book, and I'm like, oh my God, this is just me being on Only Simchas all the time. And it was just such a cool thing to read. And I could not believe that was an experience somebody put in a traditionally published book that got to my eyes living in New York. I thought that was so cool. It never occurred to me you could even like try to do that until Suri Rosen did it.
And where were you in your writing career when you read it?
I think we might have debuted in the same year. So I had already been writing a while and been trying to get published a while, but I wasn't ready to do the same thing yet. But it was definitely the thing that tickled my brain like, oh, I could. I don't know what the audience is. I'm not submitting to Canadian publishers, but somebody did this and like got away with it, you know?
And what do you think that she did in this book that captured the Jewish community that felt so true to you?
Everything about the description of school experiences, of matchmaking, of the pressure of how somebody else in your family's bad reputation could affect your reputation and your prospects and all that kinds of pressure around it. Everything about it felt tinged with Jewishness and just matchmaking. You know, it's not unique to Judaism, but it's so big in Judaism. You know, her being sort of too young to enter that market herself, but trying to master it from the top, I just loved and thought was so cool. I mean, the whole thing is so Jewish in such a cool way.
Yeah. Do you feel like Jewish romance has its own distinct language or rules?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a thing that comes up in Soon by You and in An Orthodox Love by Heidi Shertok, which I think is the first sort of contemporary traditionally published modern Orthodox romance. They're both Shomer Negia, which means like only touch members of the same sex. So already you kind of have that push-pull between like, what if that's not a match for the person I'm with? How do we grapple with that? Do they kind of respect that and try to work through it? Do I change for them? And so those are two books that both handle having a Shomer Negia main character in completely different ways. But that's, you know, very much a thing that comes up with dating. You know, they're sort of all the same things if you're not concerned with religion. You know, do we feel the same about having kids? Do we feel the same politically? Do we feel, you know, there's all those things. And then, you know, you just have a lot of, there's a lot of gender division but especially in Orthodoxy. I mean, it's not as true for other denominations, but in Orthodoxy, I mean, you pray on different sides of a wall. At a wedding, you often dance on different sides of a wall. You have to really more actively get yourselves together, and it can be really hard to meet people when you don't have that natural blending. Yeah, I think there's so much. I think there's so much unique language and there's so many unique ideas. And I'm sure other cultures have sort of, you know, comparable things. It's really fun to see different Jewish romances explore that in different ways.
I understand why you wanted to set the book in the modern Orthodox world. Why now?
So I was actually working on a different book. It was my last YA novel, and I was revising it, and it was, like, killing me. I felt like I could not nail it. And sometimes you just need to, like, cheat on the book you're writing with the book you really want to be writing. And I wrote, I think, 60,000 words of Soon by You while revising Come As You Are. I mean, it just flowed. I just really wanted to write something that felt like me, that I knew, that had a different perspective. And I also just felt like I didn't want to write. I loved writing YA, don't get me wrong, but I didn't want to be writing teenagers anymore. Like, all my adults grapple with adulthood, with what it means to be an adult, with what it means to be a grown-up, with feeling left behind. I mean, I still feel like I don't understand how things work, and I have been married almost 20 years. I have 2 kids, and I still feel like a child sometimes. You know, I'm like, rather than writing teenagers, I want to write the adults who, like, don't feel like they know how to get past how powerless they felt as teenagers or undereducated in certain things that they felt as teenagers. And I wanted to see more heroines who felt the way that I feel a lot of the time. But there's only kind of so authentically you can do that to your own head and heart when they're living totally different lives from you. And I was like, enough. I feel like we have reached the point. There's so much Jewish representation. I'm not responsible for being like, oh, you're going to think I'm the voice of all modern Orthodoxy. You're not. I'm not the first. I hopefully won't be the last. To be among them feels great.
Book 3, a book that changed your worldview. Biblical Images, Men and Women of the Bible by Adine Steinsaltz.
So Rav Steinsaltz did this collection of essays on the personhood of these different biblical characters. I love characters. I love all these bits and pieces of people and the way that they're dissected. An unusual thing I love is kind of the more flawed biblical people. Dahlia and Jezebel each get one of those essays in Biblical Images. And I just thought it was such phenomenal digging into these people that you never see dug into, that you never see anybody try to search for more from. And, you know, Jezebel has sort of become synonymous with all these shameful, evil things. And he's not excusing her behavior or murdering prophets, any of that. He's not making her a good queen. But it's a whole contextual background that he provides of sort of think about where she's coming from in terms of being a royal from another nation and what her role is in joining the people of Israel, in having this marriage, in think what she's supposed to be bringing into it, how she's coming from a place with different customs, with different values, and how she applies that. And Thalia is in Kings 2, Malachim Bet, where she basically murders her entire family so that she can become queen. One baby is saved by a woman named Yehosheva to like come back later and continue the line. But in Jewish history, it's supposed to be like a very solid line. And so she became the only ruling queen that way for, I think, 6 years. And then they murdered her. But same kinds of thing, like just all this context about, I think her chapter is called The Lust to Rule. And just what if you were so obsessed with it? And so, you know, you had so much passion to give toward this thing and so much desire toward this thing. And I actually was so inspired by the book. I think I read it my year in seminary that I gave a class on it called Hell Hath No Fury, Evil Women of the Bible. But this whole thing about giving people context the way that he gave to Jezebel and better channeling your passions as sort of an amazing trait that just needs a better target. As far as Thalia was just, I was so inspired by that. Just the whole concept of meeting people in their context and not using it to excuse them or sanctify them, but just giving a fuller picture of a person. But I was just so fascinated by that. He tackled these women that I had not seen talked about in any other commentary, book, anything ever. Jezebel there's like a cute thing in a commentary about how like she had like 2 good traits where she like shuffled her feet for the dead on the way out and clapped her hands for brides or something. That was it. That was like all I saw about them. And so somebody plucking these women from their relative biblical obscurity and fleshing them out and giving them context, just the whole idea of doing that, of even seeking out doing that, meant so much to me.
Do you think that perspective of context for these flawed characters has impacted how you've approached writing characters or telling stories?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you cannot primarily write female characters and not, especially if they have personality and an edge and a filthy mouth and a thriving libido, and not expect a billion reviews that are like, she was insufferable, I wanted to slap her. I mean, you get that constantly. And it's sort of brutal. And I don't care to sort of water down my characters so that they don't get that response. I will give you the context of where they're coming from. If you decide that like it's not enough for you to forgive their errors as if whatever, try not to like go off. But I will always try to give you that this is why they are the way they are. This is why they have communication issues. This is why they struggle with intimacy. This is why they might prefer physical to emotional. I've written LGBTQIA this is why it's taking her longer to figure out her identity, or this is why she can't just come out when you think she should come out, or, and the context is everything. And so, yes, I 100% think that I at least try to apply that to every character I write and give the fleshed out, fuller picture of who they are and why they are who they are and why they have the flaws they have. And I hope you will love them knowing it all, but you don't have to. I do.
Book 4, the book you're reading now, Sisters of Fortune by Esther Shehebar.
So I just read Sisters of Fortune by Esther Shehebar, and that was so much fun. I have always felt like there's just not enough Sephardi and Mizrahi representation in Jewish literature. It's so Ashkenazi dominated, which I know I'm contributing to, but I always try to have a Sephardi and Mizrahi character in there somewhere. But reading a whole book set in, they call it like Syrian Jewish Jane Austen, and it's so apt. There's 3 sister main characters, each kind of dealing with, romance and expectation and coming of age in her own way. And they really have such distinct personalities. She did such a great job really making them individual characters in a way that is very hard to do when you're writing characters of the same gender having their own perspectives. I thought she did a fantastic job with that. But it was just really fun, and it was really cool because it's still very Jewish, but there was so much language that I didn't understand. Food I've eaten but absolutely do not know how to make. There are customs that are totally recognizable to me, having had Syrian friends, but things that were totally new to me. And so it was so cool to read Jewish literature, still learn so much, but see so much. And I think it's such a much needed perspective to have in the kind of Jewish lit canon. So definitely recommend Sisters of Fortune by Esther Shehebar. And if you are a Jane Austen fan, I mean, there's like nothing not to love.
I agree. We had her on the show. She was fantastic. And that book was great. Book 5, the author's latest book, Soon by You, by Dahlia Adler. You touched on this a little bit earlier. You had started to talk about whether or not you feel a sense of responsibility to portray modern Orthodoxy in a particular way. And you said, there's enough out there. You don't feel like you need to be the voice. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. As I was reading, I was so conscious of the fact that the modern Orthodox community generally feels this sense of wanting to present themselves as being very strictly observant according to Jewish law. Your characters are questioning that, and they're grappling with which things feel okay to them. So I wonder if you could take us farther into your thought process.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, there's still not a ton of modern Orthodox representation, but I think there's a lot of the more strictly observant, when people, I think of Orthodox romance, they think of the kind where they don't touch and they have arranged marriage or just matchmaking heavy. And it doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like, casually hooking up on the Upper West Side in one of your apartments. Or I didn't want that to be the only image of what it looks like. I wanted to write a different way that it could look and a different way that it can feel and a different way that it is. And so I'm really happy to have been able to do that. And a lot of that does come with questioning. I mean, the whole thing of modern Orthodoxy is continuing to observe these ancient laws, but doing it while living in a modern context. And so one thing that I really wanted to make clear, first of all, these characters are choosing it. Everything that they are doing, they are choosing to do. So to whatever extent they observe Sabbath, they wear religious articles, like Judah wears a tzitzis and a kippah every day, and that's very clearly on the page that he's always wearing that, and that doesn't stop. He learns Talmud, I think it's 3 days a week. He goes to services every day. And I want to make clear they're choosing those things and they're continuing to choose those things. And even when he decides to ultimately sort of alleviate himself of one of the things, which is being Shomer Negiah, because it's not a fit. He chooses the woman he loves over observing that law. It doesn't make him check off everything else. And he doesn't feel like she wants him to, and she doesn't want him to. And that's part of why they work is, he sort of says at some point, you love me as I am with all my contradictions. I am a hypocrite about this. I know that. I'm just going to go ahead and be a hypocrite about it. Because a lot of it is sometimes you just kind of have to choose to be a hypocrite to be in the modern world and also being Orthodox. And so she has her, she was raised or is a little less strict than him. So she's already made her choices. She actually doesn't change in any way. in the book religiously, but she's always observant. These things matter to her. She just has which parts are the strong values to her, which are kind of the more traditional parts. And she's very into Shabbat and holidays. And so those things matter to her. But she says, for me, dressing modestly or, not touching boys, like those aren't things that strengthen my Judaism or feel healthy for me as a person. I don't do them. They do absolutely work for other people. And I did my best to make clear that, any choices they make are not the right ones, the sane ones, the only, oh, you're not modern if you choose not to. Nope, it's all good. This is what they are choosing for themselves. But I wanted to also make clear they are choosing religion. Like Ariel's sister has chosen to stop being religious. That's a choice she made. It didn't get her ousted from her family. Ariel knows that's on the table. It isn't the choice she wants to make. So I wanted to make clear that they do love their religion and all the things that they're holding on to. They're making choices about what their priorities are and what feels right for them and what feels like a good fit in the religion. And yes, that's them picking and choosing, which is sort of, this phrase that people use as this terrible thing you do. But I think we all do it. So, and that's also explicitly on the page, that entire conversation in Soon by You.
Ariel has this reputation, which she wears kind of uncomfortably. She has a reputation for her casual hookups. She has this terrible nickname. And she intellectually wants to own that she has the same right to owning her sexuality as the guys around her, but she resents this label. And then there's Judah, who is trying to navigate his burgeoning fame and wanting to please his audience and also making choices in his own personal life. It felt to me like there's this great romance on the page, but it's so much about shame and the way that shame functions in a religious community.
She doesn't have shame about it, to me.
I guess I don't mean that she felt shame herself, but just that her reputation sort of functioned as its own entity of how she was perceived and how Judah might perceive her or whether or not he wanted to be in a relationship with her. And she has to navigate her reputation as its own separate thing.
Yeah. So Judah, for example, is constantly set up. And Ari is somebody who knows she will not be. She knows what her reputation does as far as kinds of her prospects. And she's just a name people know. I mean, this sort of has always been a thing. There's just, I'm sure it's still true now, but there were always those few names that floated around that kind of everybody knew as a girl with a reputation. And as far as I know, every single one ended up happily married. And they were always kind people, but it didn't stop people from, sort of saying that stuff about them. And so I a little bit wanted to give tribute to that girl because every one of those girls I ever met, I liked so much. To me, it's not that she doesn't own it. And I mean, not that she's wearing it as a badge of honor, but she doesn't feel bad about any of it. For him, it's my name, my reputation, working in something that's specifically Jewish. At the time, his main income is being a wedding singer. He has no choice but to care about how he's viewed. He has no choice but to care about his standing in the community because that community is his entire life, not just socially, but economically, financially, spiritually. It's literally everything for him. She has a more secular job. She has a foot in another world. He doesn't. For him, he has to care about how he's viewed in a way that she doesn't, except to the extent that if she does want to get married, how she's viewed like that, is something that she has to consider. And so that's why she sort of preemptively assumes marriage is off the table for her when, by the time they meet, she just thinks it's not going to happen because she's, in a way, I guess, been traumatized is a much heavier word than I mean to use, but, at least been made to feel like you're in this box and you don't get to get out of this box. And Judah, puts himself in this box where he doesn't think he gets to get out of that box. And so this is the story of both of them getting out of boxes that they did not think they were ever going to be able to.
Yeah, and the other character that gets out of a box is Judah's brother, who is gay and comes out to Judah over the course of the book. And I so appreciated the way you handled that storyline. And I know that LGBTQ representation is so important to you, and you started this website, LGBTQ Reads, which curates books with representation that's meant for all ages. So if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to feel passionately about inclusivity in that way.
Yeah, this was a long time ago. So LGBTQ Reads has actually had its 10th anniversary last month. So it's really been a long time. And my second novel was my first romance between two girls. So at the time, I was just sort of like getting very frustrated. I felt like none of the characters were working. And I was talking to one of my critique partners. I was like, I wish I could just make her a lesbian. And something clicked in my head. And I was like, no, wait, I really feel like she is one. And I sort of went back to the text that I had and I stripped back her whole romance that wasn't working. And I was like, does she have chemistry with anybody in the book? And the only person she has genuine chemistry with is this waitress. And so I turned the waitress into, she's a waitress undercover. She's actually a publicity assistant. And so that's how that became my first sapphic romance. And then while working on that, I was like, oh, I'm really enjoying researching for this book. And, you know, I was like reading everything I could get my hands on. I'm like, oh, no, I really have to get a good handle on what this love interest looks like. Let me look at pictures of attractive women, you know, till I really get it right. And then I sent the book to a friend who said, like, this does not read like it was written by a straight girl. And I'm like, I am not sure that it was. So, you know, that was sort of that. And in terms of, you know, my life, I'm already married and to a man and are monogamous and all that. But I, you know, caring about it and wanting to see more representation of it and wanting to, you know, it's sort of the same thing as living that other life. So, you know, another way to do it. It's not a life I'm, you know, those relationships are not relationships I'm going to have. And so getting to write them and getting to promote other people's writing of them feels phenomenal to me. And at the time, there were some really good websites for very specific things. So if you wanted to read a lesbian romance, you could go to lesbianreview.com. And if you wanted to read a gay romance, you could go to, you know, Joyfully J. And if you wanted to read YA, you could go to YA Pride. But I was like, you can't cohesively find all of this anywhere. And I feel like because people are so hungry for more queer representation, they're more likely to read across category than they are with other kinds of things. And so that was the impetus for LGBTQ Reads, sort of getting to cover these areas that weren't covered as much, but also letting people who were just like, I want to read anything with LGBTQ representation to be able to find, you know, everything that I could find in one place. And as it turns out, representation has exploded in publishing. And so there's now a tremendous amount, you know, and it was always being done by indie publishers, but now that it's being done by larger publishers, it's sort of easier to find in libraries and in schools and on bookstore shelves and places that didn't really have it before. And so I want to make it so if you walk into a bookstore and you're trying to figure out which books have what I want, my website will help you do that. If you're buying for a library, I will help you find what you want. The thing about being like under the LGBTQ umbrella is more likely than not, if you are Jewish, if you are Black, if you are Indigenous, so is the rest of your family. Obviously, there's transracial adoption and other situations where it's not the case. But for the most part, you are probably surrounded by people who share your marginalization. There's nobody else by in my family, as far as I know, in my immediate family, in my extended family. You know, it's sort of like you're gonna find your friends in books then. And so that to me made it feel like such an immediate need. Is just I just kept thinking of all those people who just don't have a person next to them who understands what it's like to be X, you know? And especially I hear from like people exploring gender or something all the time. And now there's so many great books to give them. And it's very cool.
It's so important. And I just want to say how incredible it is and apt that as a writer, you know, kind of figured out your own sexuality by writing and through telling the story on the page. That makes a lot of sense to me.
I think that happens a lot, actually. But yeah.
Yeah. What's most meaningful to you about your Jewish identity right now?
I mean, it's not an easy time, but I see Jews lifting each other up so much and are so specifically passionate about supporting Jewish creatives and supporting Jewish organizations. And I just think the way that we stick together is amazing. I love all of that. And I mean, Jews can argue about anything. We have so many, we have different denominations and so many different ways to observe. And so, you know, when people sort of cross their comfort line even within Judaism to read my Modern Orthodox book, that feels pretty amazing. And I've heard people be like pleasantly surprised, which is very cool. But I mean, I'm like Ariel and I love Shabbat and the holidays. I love the things we can pass down. My kid loves holidays, like cries when Pesach ends because he just thinks Passover is the greatest thing in the entire world, which like, okay. Not
He's
my
not doing
food
the
holiday.
cooking yet.
No.
Yeah.
But passing on that joy through generations is such an incredible thing. And these traditions. And if you strip Judaism away, you know, I'm Eastern European. None of my grandparents carry the pride of the countries that kicked them out or tried to kill them. You know, like Judaism is what we have running through our blood that we can be proud of and be excited about and pass down. And I will always love having that culture here and to pass down. And I know it is a hard culture for other people to understand. The whole ethnicity, race, religion, like, yeah, it's very self-defining, and that's, you know, that's the life I know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing those characters that I think do present a whole different insider perspective to readers of all different backgrounds. And I just really admire the way that you hold your values so front and center and honoring people's complexities and still just telling a really incredible story. So I wish you all the success with Soon by You, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for joining us today for the 5 Books. Our guest today was Dahlia Adler talking about her book, Soon by You. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear about it. Drop us a comment on our Instagram at 5bookspod or to our email team@5bookspod.org. We also have a newsletter. We'll send you an email reminder to keep you up to date with new episodes. Plus, it includes links to all the books we discussed and even more book recommendations. You can sign up for this newsletter in our show notes or on our website, 5bookspod.org. I'm Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Our producer is Odelia Rubin. Editorial and website support from Amelia Merrill. Music by Dove Rosenblatt and Blue Dot Sessions. Art by Alad Lifshitz of the Dove Abramson Studio. Thank you especially to the Jewish Book Council, and thank you to Felicia Herman and David Benor.